So I'd just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years, nearly engaged and moving in together, when things fell apart. It took a good amount of time to be back on my own and get my shit together. When my friends began encouraging me to get back out there, needless to say, I wasn't really wanting anything at that point, nor looking for anything. But they insisted that I at least go check out and go on a few casual dates for practice, just to kind of get my skills back together, so to speak. I think they were all just kind of concerned because I'd become quite a hermit. So I matched with this girl who's home from college for the summer. She was a little out of the way from me, but I was eager to meet her, and she seemed really interested as well, and was even willing to come to my area to meet. I really wasn't that interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this. You know, practice, whatever the hell that means. A date doesn't mean commitment. Whatever. I want to be very clear though. I was honest and explicit with her from the very beginning that I was not looking for anything serious, or really anything at all. I was very forthcoming that I'd gotten out of something serious and was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet me, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. So I get there. She was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked in her pictures. I'm not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pics from Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old, which I verified based off of the tattoos she had in person versus the one she didn't have in pics. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there to just have new experiences anyway, right? No big deal. I felt so bad because the entire time she seemed incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glass, which I actually found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and tried to keep her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things you figure you chat about on dates like this. Where she grew up, music you're into, school you go to, what major are you in? All to which I literally received only one-worded answers. It went on like this for an hour. She was not working with me at all. But I tried to keep room in my heart because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understand that on a personal level. And she pulls out a book and says, "I got this for you." And I responded gratefully, thanking her and inquiring what it was about, because hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" I'm very confused. I just kind of look at her like, what? And she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, "No, I have never heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, obviously, but I made light of it and said I found it funny, because I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finish lunch, I'm still receiving one-worded answers despite our funny moment. And I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry. She became very adamant on spending more time together and asked if we could do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person here, so I agreed. And we found a nearby park to walk in, and that's where the shit gets really weird. We sat on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby, folks jogging past us. I start making conversation yet again, but still getting that one-worded answer. Then seemingly out of nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked that I just stood there frozen, not knowing what the hell to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made much conversation with me at all, who was so nervous she was visibly shaking, just turned into a freaking bear mauling my face in like 0.6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was put off so bad and honestly afraid to do or say anything. Like, what do you even do in that situation? I was hoping she picked up on my very obvious body language that I wasn't reciprocating anything whatsoever. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. And then this really nasty, disgusting guy walks by, gawking and catcalling us. Literally began to proposition us into a three-way. And I'm just like, WTF is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. Thankfully, I ended up warding off the guy after telling him very politely, no, more than several times, all the while she's just laughing. And I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde over here. So he leaves. And now I'm insisting that I need to leave as well and go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying, gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" When I tell you I was nervous, I was like, I really need to go home. And she was like, "Can I come?" And I told her very firmly, no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me. And I had to say no more than 3 times. So finally I'm home and frankly just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt abnormal. She texts me after she gets home and asks me out on a second date. I was still being very kind despite being made incredibly uncomfortable, and told her I thought she was a very cool chick and I had a nice time. Lie. But I did not feel anything there, and I reminded her that I wasn't looking for anything again. She text bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought that I was so into her and that things went great. I did not respond to any of these messages because now she's continuing to cross boundaries, and I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being very decent by at least being honest with her. The text continued. I figured they're gonna eventually stop because it was just a first date, right? How can someone be so upset over someone not reciprocating on a first date? They did not stop. By the text, you would have thought we just ended a 2-year relationship, and she began calling me, at which point I had to block her number. So, Nightmare Tinder girl, please, for the love of everything, let's never ever meet again.
Hey everyone, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more upcoming stories and exciting content.
This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around and had a few creepy encounters during this, but this guy took the cake. He was an acquaintance my brother had met at a bar a few times, and was showing around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too, because we ended up going on a date together. This date was probably the worst date I've ever been on. I showed up to the restaurant we were meeting at, and he was late, which isn't really that big of a deal, so I let it slip and we went to sit down. To be honest, I knew from the start I wasn't attracted to this guy, but I thought I would just be polite and see if we had a nice night. He started off politely too. He held the door for me, pulled my seat out, all of that stuff. It wasn't really necessary, but it was a nice gesture. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our order, I was reading the menu and he started talking about how much his fiance would have liked this place. That took me by surprise, and I naturally asked about his fiance. He revealed that he had a fiance before moving over here, but he had just left her to move to another country. So I asked why they had broken up, and he said they never really technically broke up as such, but he got fed up with her nagging him about various things and just moved away. I didn't really know what to say after that, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't really very forthcoming. Finally, our waiter came over and started asking us what we were going to order. To clarify for the next part, our waiter was a man of color and he had an unusual accent for that area. So my date just stares blankly at him for a while, then turns to me and says, "You understand this guy?" And I said yes, I could easily understand him, before telling him our orders. After our waiter left, this guy continued to shock me. He said, "I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady, but that guy talked weirdly and I didn't get it." Wow. Way to tell me you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before I ended up getting angry with him. I don't remember verbatim what I exactly said. It was just something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks." And why make racial remarks? Then he got annoyed with me, told me he wasn't being racist, he just wasn't used to that kind of person where he was from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people he was used to be within his country. He did end up calming down after that and told me he wouldn't want that, because he's glad that he did meet me. Honestly, I found that a little weird, given that I didn't see any way to say that this date was going well, and he didn't know me very well, at all. But I decided that we had ordered, I should just stay, get my meal, and try to redeem the evening before I leave, and definitely never see this guy ever again. So I answered most of his questions about me, those basic getting to know me and small talk stuff for the most part. Then started on about my previous dates, if I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage, and then be submissive to my husband or not. It was at this point I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot, hence the misogyny, the weird attitude, the sexual stuff, and all his other closed-minded bullshit. So I settled for a none of your business. Now, I need to leave. I checked the prices on the menu and left the money for my half of the food plus a tip on the table and got up to leave. He said he didn't see why I was being unreasonable with him, as though this had been a normal date, but then told me that I couldn't expect him to take my money, because that was an insult to him. Fine. You want to pay for my meal that's not getting eaten? Go ahead, pay for it. I'm not even going to be mad that you're spending your money on food that didn't get ate. So I took my money back and walked straight out. I just assumed that yes, this was an awful evening, but I would never have to see him again. I wasn't even back to my house when my brother started texting me, asking me where I was, because my date had called him in tears saying that I'd gone off for no reason, and he didn't know where I was or what to do. Thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it and assumed that I'd left for some sort of reason. I explained everything to him, and he was pretty surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact with this dude. My brother stopped meeting up with him, and we both blocked the Facebook account that we had for him too. My brother had to block his number too because he would not stop texting him about me, alternating between being really worried about me to saying he hoped I dropped dead. Then he started making endless different accounts on social media to harass us. He told my brother he didn't know why we weren't talking to him. He posted a bunch of weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. We continued to block them and moved on. The harassment got worse. He found me and followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend and then just turned up one day, standing around outside my house asking to come in and speak to me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in, and started to tell me that he didn't want to let me go because I would never find a man who loved me like he would, and that if I walked away from him again, I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him, before I finally got fed up of this, yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone, and kicked him in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me, and said I was being ungrateful to him. And I took my opportunity to run inside and lock my door. He started banging on my door, then trying to push it inward. I was getting both upset by this man and super fed up of his presence in my life. So I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling him that someone was trying to get into my house. I was told that someone would be here soon. But 20 to 30 minutes later, there was no sign of anyone or anything. I was getting really upset and nervous because he was still forcing himself into the door, and I thought the lock would break soon. So I called my brother who lived nearby, just because I knew he would come, even though I wasn't sure if he would be able to help much. About 15 minutes later, my brother turned up after a brief conversation that I didn't quite hear outside. He was gone off the door, and I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on, and if we would be alright to look outside now. He didn't reply, and the next thing I heard was the police turning up. So I did go outside to see what was going on. Apparently, after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor saying there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guess this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked out of breath and pretty shook up, and that guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had tried to stop the man from getting into my house, and then the man had hit him. I told my side of the story, and some of the other neighbors were asked what they'd seen, and if they were able to tell them about his attempts to get inside. Plus, there was marks on the outer side of the door where he had repeatedly tried to get inside. The police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward, I was called and told they thought they had found him, but when they wanted me to look at the suspect, it definitely wasn't the same man. I never heard anything else, and I really don't know what happened to him. I never saw him again, so I'm probably safe after 15 years. Regardless, I don't ever want to see that guy again.
This all happened when I was 19. Not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck on there either until like the third month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We'd been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car. But I had to admit, I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. We had video chatted almost every other week and called most days, so I assumed I'd just gotten really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some point, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she sent me a slew of annoying texts. Admittedly, I had chalked all this up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't really blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads, and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came into an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she talked about was parked in the front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which really surprised me as I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about her plans, when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise, or?" Katie looked confused, and she told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I'd seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said we had to get out of here now. We both ran to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad was not there, and that she'd been home alone all day until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I'd seen the guy last. He was looking at us from that same window again. Now I got a better look at him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw what we had saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in the house by herself right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bed was in the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she had never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out, and I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of the doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked. and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one. They told Katie and me that it would probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes, and she was going to stay at her friend's house and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did, and I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what had happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at the corner of the house just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again, but I did text Katie and said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever went back to that house alone.
Tinder is a funny place. Not as funny as in haha, but like strange, you know? People pretend to be so normal, but normal people don't need dating apps. Take me, for example. I was 29 years old and single for the first time since I was 11. Best believe I was fucked up. Me and my ex-wife got together when we were kids and finally had the balls to split up 17 years later. It wasn't what you would call healthy at all. People grow apart, especially if you get together before you've grown at all. You don't really think about it, but a lot of things change when you get divorced. Living alone is fucking weird. Even more so sleeping by yourself after years of company. But the hardest thing is trying to adapt to the ever-changing dating world. After some convincing from a friend, I decided to make a Tinder account. Why? I don't know. I had the perfect dad bod, scruffy beard, and pickup truck. Why would someone pick me out of a million profiles? I guess I spoke too soon because soon after, my inbox swarmed with messages. Apparently, I'm exactly what every woman wants, but one in particular stuck out. Fiery red hair with these dimples. Her profile said she was an addict of horror movies and photography. This stuck out because my ex-wife hated horror movies, and I have an undying passion for them. Honestly, in some ways, it was the main factor in our divorce. I'm sure my horror fans understand. So, I messaged her. 1-2, Freddy coming for you. Oh, I don't think I mentioned. My name is Freddy. So, I thought it would be funny, you know? The Freddy Krueger song. Anyways, she got the joke like I knew she would, and we just hit it off. After a few days, I got her number, and a week after that, we went on our first date. We had talked so much through text, I was afraid we wouldn't have anything to talk about in person, so I chose to take her to a movie. They also happened to be playing Lights Out, which looked and was fucking amazing. As the movie progressed, we slowly got more comfortable and close, especially at the part where the creepy demon woman was scratching on the floor. Jesus. It was around that time I decided to hold her hand. I just reached over and grabbed it. After a minute, I looked over at her to see her smiling. After returning a smile, I looked back towards the movie screen. Just then, a bright light flashes, blinding my peripheral and causing the theater to fill angry shouts. I look over, and she's sitting there with her phone up and takes another photo of us not giving a shit about all the people yelling. She turns to me wearing the same smile from a moment ago and says, "Our first time holding hands." Honestly, it did weird me out, but I just chopped it up to she's just crazy. But listen, all women are crazy, and it's just to what extent. You have to choose your crazy. My ex-wife would make fake social media accounts to get me to cheat on her with herself. This girl likes to take pictures. I can deal with that. The rest of the movie went fine. I purposely tried to avoid any dating milestones until it was over. I got her home, and it's time to say goodnight, and I think long and hard about my next move. Do I try to kiss her? I mean, she's gorgeous and was cool most of the night, but would our kiss just be interrupted by the flash of her camera? She stands there smiling at me, and I know what she's waiting for. That's when I look down and notice her phone in her hand. She is literally prepared to take this picture. I know, I stood there for an abnormal amount of time, but eventually, I go in for a kiss and sure enough, I'm blinded once again by the flash of her phone. The kiss ends a bit flat after the interruption, and she giggles while saying, "Our first kiss," as she admires the photo. She tells me to text her and goes inside, leaving me completely speechless on her stoop. Well, what the fuck do I do now? I thought. Deciding such a flaw could be ignored, I continued to see her. After 2 weeks, her photo gallery had filled up with photos of things like our first car ride together, the first cuddle session, and first dinner date. But there were a lot of stranger things too, like the first time we looked at each other for even longer than 10 seconds, and a picture of the first time that I took our picture, which she made me take, so she could take that picture of me taking the picture. It was exhausting. Half of the time she'd take pictures for no reason. I would often catch her out of the corner of my eye just standing there waiting for me to turn so she could take a picture. I had enough. The day I decided to break it off with her, we had taken the subway downtown to go to the museum. You can only imagine how many fucking pictures she took in there. I planned to do it on the way home when we stopped on the platform. At least there would be people around in case this crazy girl tried to kill me. Unfortunately, I'd never get the chance. After having to wait and be the last people off, we rushed to slip through the closing door only to barely make it. That's when we realized her long red curls were stuck in the door. I desperately tried to free her as I pulled on her hair and pounded on the window begging for someone to help. The people on the train tried to pry the door open, but once the train started moving, she lost her footing and was dragged off the rest of the way, disappearing into the tunnel. I turned to the crowd that stared at the man who couldn't save the girl. As you can imagine, it fucked me up a little. I didn't want to be with her, but I definitely didn't want her to die. Even though we saw each other for a few weeks, I was only actually in her presence maybe 5 or 6 times. I definitely hadn't met her family, but still felt obligated to go to the funeral. I had no clue what to expect, but when I got there, it seemed like a perfectly normal viewing. A sign-in book, arranged flowered, the whole shebang. I stepped up to the casket to pay my respects. Of course, it was closed. She had been dragged away by a train. There's no way they could have it opened. My thought was interpreted by a blinding flash to my right. I turned to look out of reflex, and there she was, standing with her phone out. Her gorgeous red hair draped down her body that looked as though it had been priced back together like a jigsaw puzzle. Some pieces obviously misplaced. The camera flashed again, and she was gone. I'm not one of those people to believe in ghosts, but I also know that her death didn't affect me to the point that I'm going fucking crazy. Yes, we were dating, and yes, I didn't save her, but I did try, and it was in no way my fault, so forgive me for not being messed up over a situation where I tried my best, but just wasn't meant to succeed. The thing is, she never went away. I mean, there are times where I don't see her, but if anything important happens, she's right there to take a picture. The call I received about my new job, she was standing in the kitchen with her phone up before the phone ever rang, her body disfigured and gray. When I met my new wife, she was there as well. Also, on our first date, and even the first time we made love, she was right there in the corner, the flash becoming more and more normal. When my son was born, she was in the room taking the first photo. Even though we never get to see the photos, it's kind of like having our own family photographer. My wife can see the flash, but she can never see the mangled form just to the left of her, setting up the perfect shot. My son, on the other hand, usually notices her before I do. Even when he took his first steps, he was walking towards her. One thing I'm sure of, that had to be the perfect photo.